Today we're going to be turning this SpectraPly plywood into this colored pattern plywood. Here's how we did it. We're starting with a SpectraPly panel made by Cousino Wood Products. I'm using a 9-inch by 40-inch panel that's 3/4 of an inch thick and a color called Mayflower. But on their website, cwp-usa.com, which I'll leave a link for in the description, they have many options for size and color. I start by making a line in the center of my panel, which will be my first cut, but before cutting, I sand both sides of the panel so that the glue will stick better to it later. I cut the panel in half using my crosscut sled so that I have shorter but twice as many strips when ripped down. Once I have my two panels cleaned up, I set my fence to 1 inch and rip my panel into strips. The process I'm using to make this pattern plywood is not one that I came up with. I've seen other woodworkers use it, but I learned it from multiple videos from Michael Alm on his channel Alm Fab. He's very skilled at making pattern plywood and tons of awesome patterns. And if you're interested in learning more about pattern plywood, you should definitely check out his channel. I'll leave a link to that in the description as well. I've wanted to try making pattern plywood for a while now, and I thought this colored SpectraPly would be an interesting take on it. I lay the strips out so that each strip overlaps the last by about 1 inch. This will reduce the amount of waste material I have later in the project. With some help from my son, we got these strips prepped for glue by flipping them all 90 degrees. I applied and spread a generous amount of glue to all but my last strip and flipped them back into their starting positions. My next step was to clamp these strips together, and this part of the project didn't really go that well. At the time, I didn't have any clamps designed for panels, so once I added pressure to the clamps, the strips started to warp. I added a 2x4 and another clamp to add some down pressure, and this helped a lot, but as you'll see, I still had some issues. Once the glue had dried, I unclamped the panel and marked a 45-degree angle on one side. I set up a straight edge and used my circular saw to cut the excess material off the panel. Unfortunately, because of the amount of strips that had shifted during the glue up, my saw's blade wasn't set deep enough and part of the panel wasn't cut all the way through. No huge deal though, I grabbed a pull saw and cut the rest of the excess off. Now it was time to clean up the height differential from the strips shifting. And to do this, I decided to pick up a hand plane and give it a try. Once I got the depth of the blade set correctly, it did a great job of flattening my panel. It also made these awesome cotton candy ribbon shavings. If you have any thoughts on what to do with these shavings, let me know in the comments. And while you're over there, consider hitting the like button if you enjoyed the video, or subscribing if you haven't already. I was almost ready to make my next round of cuts, but I decided to give it a quick sanding to smooth out some marks left by my plane. A tip if you're going to be working with SpectraPly is to keep the dust down as much as possible while sanding. The dye used on these veneers is water-based, and the dust from the dyed sheets can stain the natural ones. I'd suggest some good dust collection, or what I used, a tack cloth. Just make sure not to get the panels wet while there's still dust on them, and you should be fine. Next, I set the table saw back up, didn't adjust the fence at all, and started cutting new strips with a 45-degree angle edge against the fence. The layers of veneer that make up the plywood now run at a 45-degree angle on each strip. By lining these strips up back to back or point to point, I can make a chevron pattern. The glue on a couple of the strips didn't hold, but I was able to re-glue these sections with a small amount of super glue to hold them in place until the final glue up. Again, I flipped each strip 90 degrees, added glue like before, flipped them back, and clamped them together. And again, this only worked okay. I really wasn't using the right clamps here. Now I have the Surefoot clamps made by Rockler that work great for this type of glue up. They're the clamps I used in the walnut butcher's block countertop video, so check that out if you haven't yet. Once dry and unclamped, I planed both sides of the panel again. Then sanded, first with 100 grit and then 150. And just in case this process is still a little confusing, here's the steps in order one more time. Start with a plywood panel, rip it into 1-inch strips, glue these strips together with the exposed plywood edges facing up, and each strip offset 1 inch from the last. At a 45-degree angle, cut the excess ends off one side of your new panel. Setting your newly cut edge against the table saw's fence, recut this panel into 1-inch strips. Glue these strips together point to point, and plane and sand as needed. This gave us our finished panel, and that's where we're going to leave this project for now. I have a couple of ideas on what I'll turn this panel into, but if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments and I'll check them out. Again, a big thank you to Cousino Wood Products for providing the SpectraPly panel, and to Alm Fab for the knowledge on how to make pattern plywood. Thanks so much, and we'll see you on the next one.